Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time.
Welcome to the Brain People Podcast. I'm Amanda Anguish, and I'm your host, and I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I'm with my co-host.
I'm Dr. Binus, and I'm a psychiatrist.
Have you ever been tempted to think that stress is all bad? We see those magazines in the grocery store that say how to get rid of stress and how to eliminate stress in your life. Well, we're here to tell you today, you don't have to worry about getting rid of all of your stress because we're going to talk about how it can be a positive thing. So, Daniel, how do you feel about stress?
Super stressed right now. You found me out.
It's hard not to be when you're talking about it.
That's right.
It's a good reminder that there is stress in the world. So if there's stress in the world, how prevalent is it?
Well, in the United States, it is very prevalent. It's unfortunately one of our hallmarks of our country and our society is that we go, go, go. The American dream, right? And so some data show that roughly 75% of Americans express that they feel quite stressed and experience symptoms of stress. And, over the last several decades, we've definitely seen the numbers creep up. And there's been a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons is I think people are just feeling more and more busy, a lot of things on their plate and feeling like they're crunched for time. And so that can really breed a lot of stress. But then, of course, we have other bigger things like COVID that really stress people out and, not...
when you don't have control over it.
Yeah, exactly. Things that you don't have control over, natural disasters, wars and rumors of wars. So, there's a lot of different things, climate change that stress people out. And then on top of that, politicians. On top of that, you have all the normal everyday stressors of relationships and health and all of that. So you can really see that we're getting more and more stressed as a nation and as a world.
I'd like to meet those 25% of people who don't think that they're ever stressed. Like, where do they live?
Well, at least, that's what they estimate those are the people that say they don't have symptoms of stress. But like you said, maybe they're in denial. Hard to say.
They don't have any stress. The same people who say, I'm fine, I'm not angry.
Right, exactly. There's been times where my wife will ask me, like, are you stressed? And I'm like, no, I'm fine. And I'm like, robotically, like, I can barely turn my head. I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I am a little stressed.
Thank you for the reminder to check in with myself to see how I'm doing.
Yes.
Yeah. So besides having a kink in your neck or your back, what are some of the symptoms of chronic stress? Because it sounds like that's what those 75% are talking about is chronic stress.
Yeah. One of the things that is really helpful to understand about stress is that there's different aspects. There's that acute, immediate stress that we sometimes even call like fight or flight feelings that come up, like where the adrenaline is being released in our body.
Like distress.
Yeah, exactly. Like distress. But then there's the more chronic long-term stress that affects our body. And this is actually related to an elevation of the hormone cortisol or other glucocorticoids that are related to cortisol. And essentially, when cortisol is released, it's not all bad. Actually, cortisol helps to regulate the immune response. It's supposed to help shut down that fight or flight feeling and to regulate the stress response. But the problem is, because we have so many stressors in our society today, that we keep getting more and more cortisol release and more adrenaline release. So basically, instead of the cortisol being able to shut down the fight or flight and the stress response, because we keep getting more stress triggered, the cortisol stays chronically elevated. So it's not the short-term release and increase of cortisol that's all bad, but it's the long-term chronic elevation of cortisol. And so when we start studying the adverse effects of chronic stress, which is the same thing as that chronic elevation of cortisol, we see that high level of cortisol affects every part of our body.
I think that's key too, especially just going back a second to like lay the foundation. Sometimes we get this idea that like cortisol, adrenaline is all bad and the oxytocin and dopamine is all good, but we're saying that you need certain levels of it to be in the happy place.
That's right, in a certain duration of time.
Yes, and duration too.
And in a lot of ways, I'd almost say, especially when it comes to cortisol and adrenaline, the duration is probably the most important factor, as well as the magnitude on some levels, but really, especially for cortisol, it's that duration factor. And if you have it elevated, ongoing, high levels of cortisol, that's where you start getting effects to your brain and your physical body too. So, for example, in our brain, you start having things like memory loss. A lot of people will come to me and they'll just be maybe in their 40s or 50s and they're complaining of memory problems.
Can't remember anything.
Right. And they're saying, Doc, I think I might be getting Alzheimer's or some kind of cognitive disorder. But we look at their life and their stress and, their sleep patterns and all of that. And we're like, yeah, no, you're not actually getting dementia. You're just getting chronically stressed. And because that chronically elevated level of cortisol is literally starting to kill off brain cells, especially in the hippocampus, which has to do with processing and sending those memories out for storage.
It sounds like it's kind of like draining the tub too soon. Like you want to keep the water in there for a while and you're like or pulling the plug and letting too much out too fast.
Yeah. And your brain just can't keep up with really consolidating, processing the memories. And then it also starts affecting the frontal lobe, is very sensitive to chronic elevation of stress too. And so that's where people's ability to reason, think clearly, their judgment, their ability to manage their emotions starts being affected as well. So that's just in the brain, but the physical body also struggles and suffers with chronic stress too. So things like GI disturbances. I mean, a lot of people,
irritable
bowel is a common one that we see with people that have high levels of stress.
I like how the irritable is even in there. Like it's showing that the more stressed, the more irritated it gets.
Yeah, your whole body, starts getting irritated. And it also can affect cardiovascular function, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, increased risk of heart attack, autoimmune diseases, because the cortisol really helps to regulate the immune function, as well as increased risk of weight gain. And then also even sexual function, because it starts affecting the hormonal levels, and that has a huge effect not only on sexual function, but then also on our body's ability to regulate other bodily functions, as well as even being able to be motivated. For example, if you start having your testosterone level affected or your estrogen level affected, this can affect mood. It can also affect like your motivation levels and your energy levels. And so all of those things start being impacted.
Like chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yeah. And even joints and muscles, skin problems. So you can start seeing like pretty much the whole body is impacted by stress.
Well, this sounds like it's very stressful to talk about all of these problems. Yes. So maybe we should talk about, we're really talking about being more resilient today. We want to learn, like, I don't know how everybody else feels listening to this, but how do I get rid of all of these stressors in my life?
Well, yes.
Maybe we can't get rid of the stressors, but we can.
The first step is we have to stress ourselves and our listeners, because otherwise there's not going to be a felt need to actually exercise resilience, right? So yes, I'm glad, Amanda, that you're feeling sufficiently stressed enough to want to hear the answers. So
hurry up, let's get there.
We have actually 10 amazing solutions, secrets, if you will, and tips for you to practice to deal with stress and to make you a resilient person. Yeah. And I'll tell you from personal experience, the more consistently I practice these things, I really notice a difference. And I started noticing a difference when I start slipping in any of these, because I'll I'll be the first one to admit it. My life is very stressful, and so sometimes we say, "Oh, you must have a terrible life," but that's actually not necessarily true. And that's the first thing that I really want to get into. The first tip to dealing with resilience or stress and becoming more resilient is actually recognizing that stress can be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you said that, it reminded me of several years ago we had snow in the area, and a lot of people were, frustrated because the power went out, and the power went out because a lot of trees went down in the area. And I don't know a lot about trees and, the weather and everything here. I've only been here 10 years, but once somebody was telling me, oh, the reason the trees fell down is because they hadn't experienced snow in the past, and pushing them over, because the more snow and storms that they experienced, the deeper the roots that they would get, and that would have kept them from falling over when this snowstorm came, because they just weren't used to it. And so it sounds like that's kind of similar to what you're saying, is that stress can actually be good for us to make us more resilient.
Yes, because basically it can certainly prepare the road, so to speak, prepare your mind, your body for dealing with other stressors. So, and that's a big aspect of it. Another aspect is that if you have too little stress, then you're not going to be motivated to really do much. In other words, think about it this way. If you were in a class and you had an assignment, like a paper that was due in 6 months, how motivated would you be to really work on that paper?
Not very.
Exactly. If you're anything like me, you're like, okay, I'll put it off, right? Now, if that paper was due in 2 days, how motivated would you be to deal with it?
A lot more.
Exactly. And so the point being, if we have the right amount of stress, it can actually motivate us to get things done. Now, of course, we don't want so much that it shuts us down and we're just like deer in the headlights, can't perform. We get anxious and burned out and angry and all that.
And I can imagine somebody's listening right now. There's always a person who's going, what, you're telling me that I'm not dealing with enough stress in my life and I need to take on more? No, we're not talking to you. If you have plenty of stress, we're not saying take on more, but it's the opposite effect.
That's right. We're talking essentially about those situations where somebody just doesn't have enough to do and they don't have any real accountability or incentive to, get out of bed and start getting things done. And so a certain amount of stress and pressure is actually good. Not too much, but enough to motivate you to get things done. So that's one element of why stress can be good. Another aspect, there was an interesting Gallup study that was done, and they went around to many different countries of the world. Actually, I think there was 121 countries. And the really interesting finding, they were looking at stress, they were looking at happiness, is that they found that the happiest people in the world are highly stressed, but not depressed. And so what they found is the people that were highly stressed, why were they stressed? Well, think about a lot of the things that stress us out. Of course, there's some of those negative things like wars and natural disasters and political problems and all that. But then a lot of the stress that we tend to experience also comes from really good things like family relationships or work or
which mean
finances. Yes, exactly. The finances, right? And so those are all, in a way, can be very good stressors because, like you said, it tells us that we have money.
If I have a car payment, it means I have a car.
Exactly. It means that we have relationships with family. It means that we have a job, right? And so those things can bring great meaning into our lives. And so, our goal is not to eliminate stress, but to find meaning from it and manage it in an appropriate way.
Yeah. So there's appropriate stress and the stress. Some people bring stress on themselves, though, too. That's another thing. So we're not talking about that kind of stuff where you're getting involved in other people's problems to create, they said it was good to have stress, so I'm going to get involved in everybody's issues and it's not even my thing. No, we're talking about the actual things that you can do something about.
Exactly. So that was the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
So second thing is try to reframe your thoughts. Now, this
Mm-hmm.
is something that Amanda, you teach people to do all the time. And it's interesting because I've thought about this. There can be a stressor, very similar stressor, and two people can deal with it completely differently.
Yep.
So sometimes I use the roller coaster analogy. Some people hate roller coasters and other people love them. Same trigger,
Yeah.
right?
And it's the same exact roller coaster.
The same exact roller coaster. Why do some people hate it and some people love it? Well, it's a lot about their belief and their interpretation of that experience that makes them either love it or hate it.
It's true.
And so, again, one person might lose a job and they'd be like, oh, this is the worst thing that could have happened to me. My life is over. It's a catastrophe. And another person might lose a job and say, oh, you know what? I'm not happy that I lost that job, but I believe I can grow out of this and I can move through it in a positive way and something good can come out of it.
That's funny that you say that because I actually did lose a job once and I actually felt both of those things at the same time. Part of me was feeling like, oh man, I really need to have a job. And the other part of me was relieved because the circumstances of that job were very difficult. I was working with a difficult person. And so I was actually feeling both stress and relief at the same time.
Sounds like you were quite an ambivalent roller coaster rider there.
So I was like, this is great, but it's also scary too.
Yeah, so it's super important when we face stress. We can't change, a lot of times we can't change certain elements about the stressor, but we can change how we relate to it. Now, one of the problems is, though, that, the part that we need to engage with to kind of reframe and that sort of thing is the logical part of our brain, the frontal lobe.
Yeah.
And guess what? When we're highly stressed, that part shuts down. So it's almost, unless I talked about the third factor, which is the next one we're going to talk about, it'd be, I think, unfair to just say, oh, just reframe. So the third factor actually helps you to learn to calm down that fight or flight response when you feel stressed so that your logical brain can actually engage and come back online. And that is grounding techniques.
Yeah.
So when we deal with stress, in order to be resilient, one of the big things we can practice is grounding techniques. And we've talked about this on other shows, but I'll just mention real quick. And for those of you that are interested in learning more, you can listen to our shows, but you can also just go online and just put in grounding techniques and you'll find a bunch of different options. But basically here, the goal is to do things like deep breathing or use the 5-4-3-2-1 technique or even something like progressive muscle relaxation. And what that does is it calms down that fight or flight response, brings us back into our bodies, brings us back to the present moment, and allows us to now be able to reframe and think through things better.
Yeah, even walking or doing some kind of exercise can also be a great way to ground. It's a little bit of distraction enough to then come back in a better place to handle whatever it is that you're dealing with.
Absolutely. So the fourth thing is something that I think is hard for some of us, especially some of us that just feel like we should never be stressed and we should never be anxious or anything like that. And that is practicing acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think, Amanda? Is it normal to sometimes feel stressed? Is it normal to be afraid?
If you're me, it is. I'm guessing I'm not the only one, and you've already admitted it. Yeah. So I guess there's two of us at least.
Yeah. I would say it's abnormal if you're not feeling those things, because then essentially you wouldn't have a normal working emotional system, right? Yeah. So it's normal, and we need to practice acceptance, even of some of these so-called negative emotions like fear, anxiety, stress, anger, even depression, that sort of thing, and realize these are just actually flags, like saying, hey, something's going on here, pay attention. And when we accept those emotions as they're coming up and we act instead of shaming ourselves or putting ourselves down with a sense of compassion and curiosity, then what we'll find is like, oh, wow, I can actually discover that I have some needs that need to be dealt with here, perhaps. Mm-hmm. And so it can be very helpful.
Yeah, there's nothing like something that keeps showing up, but you don't acknowledge it's there versus something that keeps showing up and you learn how to handle it.
Yeah, exactly. So we get to learn from our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So the fifth thing is remembering to rest. We need to remember to rest. And
Even the most stressed out people have
yes,
to do this.
yeah. And it's interesting because they find that people that don't sleep enough, their cortisol levels are elevated. And so that's one aspect.
What kind of rest are we talking about, though? Because some people think like the best way to deal with my stress is just to go sleep for hours and hours and hours and hours. I'll wake up to get a meal and go to the bathroom, but then I'm going to go back and sleep because that way I don't have to deal with any of my stress.
Yeah, that's a good point. When I'm talking about healthy rest, basically I'm talking about that rest at night. So ideally about 7 to 9 hours of sleep at night, and getting sleep before midnight is important for various reasons that we don't have time to get into right now. But yeah, that nightly rest, and then you do want to actually stay awake during the day because otherwise that can mess up your sleep at night. Now, if you need to take a little cat nap in the afternoon for 20 minutes or so, that's fine. But anything above about 20 minutes can really start messing up your circadian rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just the nightly rest, it's also the weekly rest that's important as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important, I believe, from the data I've seen and also my personal experience, to take a day off a week.
Mm-hmm.
Because guess what? When we're talking about all the negative impact of chronic stress, we all have stressors that last for weeks and weeks at a time.
Yeah.
And so if we're just constantly in that stress mode, we can be practicing these other things, but we're still going to start experiencing symptoms of chronic stress. So if we have a day off per week where we're like, you know what, I'm going to disengage from these things that are stressing me out and instead intentionally fill my cup and take that time to rest physically and emotionally and spiritually, then it basically resets the stress time clock.
Yeah.
So that now we can be ready to jump into the next week.
Yeah, and even a rest during the day too. Sometimes we forget that there's opportunities to rest when we don't think there are. So one of the things I like to remind myself and others is that, you can rest even when you're in your car. Your brain is kind of on autopilot. You know how to drive wherever you're going. You've probably done it a million times. But sometimes we try to fill that time with the radio being on and that sort of thing. But sometimes you can take a mental rest. I've done this before. I'm like, I've heard so much today. I don't want to hear the radio right now. I need a brain rest from just the chaos that I'm hearing throughout the day or being involved in. And so I get my rest sometimes between here and home, and sometimes I get a rest where I'm like, I've had a long day. I just want to sit here for a little bit. Or, if you're fortunate enough to be in a place where you have nature around you, just sit outside and, watch the sun go down, or put your feet in the river if you have something like that nearby, and just hear the peace and quiet. That's another form of rest we often forget. You don't have to fill your schedule just because you can fill your schedule.
Yeah. And so that weekly rest, but like you said, even having the time during the day that we are intentionally having some quiet moments just to, okay, let me breathe.
You probably get a lot of those with 3 kids.
Oh, yeah. Let me tell you, I treasure those moments. And if I wasn't intentional with my time in the morning, the quiet time, and then my walk with the dog in the evening, I would definitely be struggling a lot more.
Yeah, and we can teach our kids how to learn how to rest too. Sometimes having quiet moments, like I was just informing a client today that, when you get home from school, you can have a quiet time, like, depending on the age of the child, from anywhere from 10 minutes to like 30 minutes. Before we do our chores, before we do our homework, we're just going to have some quiet time to just transition back home. And then it makes it that much easier to do the next thing because everybody's sort of like let go of what they had on their way into the house. And I'm sure husbands and wives can appreciate that.
Oh, yes. I'm just trying to figure out how we can extend our quiet time to like 2 hours. I think that would be perfect.
Might be a bit of a stretch.
So the next one, number 6, is exercise. Exercise is an interesting one because exercise does stress the body. But like you were mentioning earlier with the whole tree analogy in the storm, it makes us more resilient to dealing with stress in the future, both physical stress and also emotional stress. And so it's important not just to exercise once in a while, but the regular exercise will make us more resilient to psychological and physical stress, for that matter.
And nothing makes you feel better than when you already feel physically strong to handle things.
That's true. That's true. And even, acutely, it helps us to blow off some of that extra adrenaline and all that. I always think about how you sometimes tell people, if you're having a panic attack, for example, that just run as fast as you can, or even just imagining yourself running as fast as you can. And this will help to dissipate some of that adrenaline.
Yeah.
So number 7 is build social connections. So it's interesting with this one that there's so much data that shows that when we feel bonded to a community and we're not having a sense of isolation, that we really can mitigate the effect of stress in our lives. And there's various hypotheses for that, but one of the big elements is most likely increased oxytocin that comes with a sense of bonding. And we know that oxytocin, for most people, the effect on the amygdala is that it reduces activity there, which, basically the amygdala is involved in that fear response. And so when we have that sense of being bonded and connected to a social group, to friends, to even to God, and sometimes even to things like nature and the world at large, that sense of connection can really help with stress.
Yeah, there's a study that's quite popular. I've heard it several times, that people who are going through surgical procedures or painful things, that just by holding the hand of somebody reduces the level of pain that they experience, which is a stressor to most people, I think. And so, we know that from those studies as well.
Absolutely. And some of those same studies even show it's not just the subjective feeling of pain, but even the cortisol levels that are reduced through that process. Yeah. And number 8, which kind of we have alluded to already, but spending time in nature is a big stress relief. I think we're often so inundated with the artificial and with technology and all of this, all of which are more prone to activate the stress hormones in our bodies, like, the adrenaline and the dopamine and cortisol and that sort of thing. They grab your attention. But it's important for us to get out and connect with the natural. And that tends to actually bring more of a calming sense to our minds and our bodies, and brings even our brains into more of what we would say like an alpha rhythm state, which is important. We don't want to be an alpha all the time, but it is important for us to have some of those relaxing moments.
And I've heard too, even the sounds of nature are more conducive to a resting heart rate versus, the sounds of city life are more conducive to raising your heart rate.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting because the idea is going out into real nature, right? But even looking at pictures of nature and like you said, listening to nature sounds and that sort of thing, even those simple things can help.
It's interesting you say that, because I just learned recently, I was looking at something about home decoration and even bringing natural things indoors increases, a rest or a resilience as well.
When you said home decoration, my stress just went up. I'm like, no, I don't want to do decoration. No, please don't list that as a resilience technique. No,
talking about if your window, make sure there's nothing blocking your window if you have nature outside, so that you're putting the emphasis on looking outside versus, where do we tend to focus our couches?
Yeah.
Towards the television, but focus your couch towards the windows outside, especially if you have nature out there, or bring plants indoors and you have something water related to. All of these things tend to calm us even if we live in the city, so we can bring all of that.
So number 9 is maintaining healthy nutrition. So sometimes we don't realize the effect that nutrition can play when it comes to our mental health and especially dealing with stress. What we find is that high levels of processed foods, especially if they're high in refined carbohydrates will increase inflammation and make it more difficult for the brain to deal with stress. And so, snack foods, sugary foods, anything that's highly processed.
Food,
Yeah.
anything that's probably considered comfort food.
Pretty much. Yes. Yes. So that will, again, make it more difficult for people to really deal with stress in a healthy way. On the other hand, if we eat whole foods, like as grown, whole food, and ideally plant-based sources of foods, we're going to have less decreased level of inflammation. Our brain is going to be able to function better and deal with stress in a healthier way.
And there's plenty of ways to get your protein in a whole foods diet. It's not just processed foods that have protein and all these other things that we need. And carbs, we do need carbs, but not the highly processed ones.
Exactly. Yeah. And we have a whole podcast on nutrition.
Probably have a couple of
Probably. Yeah. There's so much to say about it. But bottom line is you want to eat foods as close to as grown and natural as possible and avoid all that processed stuff.
Yep.
Number 10, the last one is practicing gratitude. Practicing gratitude. And I'm grateful that we made it through this.
We're almost being...
Yes, but it's been enjoyable. And Amanda, this is something that you do daily, not only personally, but in IOP, in the intensive outpatient program too. Do you see that it makes a difference for people?
Oh yeah, from the very beginning, sometimes people have a hard time with it. They'll say, "Oh, I don't feel very grateful." And I say, "That's okay. You don't have to feel grateful to be grateful." And one of the things that I encourage them to do is figure out, what would I miss if I didn't have it? I must be grateful for it then. And if you want to get really good, I call it advanced gratitude. So find even the positive in a difficult situation. So if you're feeling stressed, one of my favorite things is when I'm asked to do something I don't feel entirely comfortable doing. That can cause a lot of stress. I like to imagine myself like in my superhero pose with my hands out, like, bring it. What do you got? Like, and I know that I'm not maybe entirely qualified to do the thing that I'm asked to do, or it feels like I'm not capable of it. But I have this awareness that it's probably going to teach me something, if anything, even if I don't accomplish it exactly the way that I want to, that I've never not learned from something.
So do you have a cape on your cape?
No, I don't have a cape. I'm not that imaginative. I just have, extra muscles.
All right. That's good. That's good. No, I like it. And there was actually one study that they did called the 3 Good Things exercise. And it was a very simple study, but for 1 week, they had people in the study write down 3 things at the end of the day that went well that day and why. And after just 1 week, the participants had a decrease in their scores on anxiety and depression, just simply by looking for the good. Mm-hmm. And of course, we know with gratitude, it doesn't take away the bad, but I always call gratitude the great contextualizer, meaning it brings the difficult into context. It helps us realize, like, okay, even though I don't like the fact that, I lost this job, or maybe I really am extremely sad because someone close to me died or something like that. When we start looking for the things that we can still be grateful for, the things that are good in our life, then it helps us realize, yes, but life still is worth living. There is still a lot of good in life, and it doesn't take away the sadness immediately. It doesn't take away or doesn't change the fact that I lost my job or whatever it might be. But it helps you realize, like, there still is a lot of good in life despite that.
Yeah, it's really key, because when I'm working with people, I notice sometimes they'll say, well, I don't want to gloss over the difficult things that are happening in life. But I never hear somebody say, well, I don't want to gloss over the good things that are happening in life. So all it's doing is acknowledging that, hey, yes, while there's something difficult happening, there's also something potentially good that could happen in this, or there are good things that are happening at the same time. And typically when we're stressed or have anxiety or depression or those sorts of things, we're not altogether looking at anything positive. We're only looking downstream. We're never looking upstream.
Yes. So there you have it. Those are the 10 resilience factors that you can practice on a daily basis, on a regular basis. These are things that, again, I've found in my life are really important for me to stay on top of. And as you do, you can actually learn to handle far more stress than you ever thought you could, and not just handle it, but really grow through it and become stronger and get more done and happier than you ever thought.
So it sounds like not only are these 10 ways to become more resilient, but it sounds like these are the 10 things that people who are successful in life do that make it's the resilience within these things that, or the resilience that comes from these things that helps them be those people that we often look at and go, how can they do so well at life? And I don't seem to be doing so well.
Absolutely. They're cues.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. And we're really happy that you spend this much time with us each week. We wish we could get to know you a little bit better too, but we hope that everything that we've shared with you today and all of our other episodes have been a blessing to you and will help you be more resilient in life. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. Your engagement will help us reach more people who need encouragement. To hear more episodes, learn about our other mental health resources, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.